The desert does not whisper, it stares back. A colossal face, half buried in sand, carved from a single block of stone older than empires, older than memory. The Great Sphinx, its eyes once painted, its skin once alive with color, now scarred by centuries of silence. The nose gone, torn away not by Napoleon's cannon, but by hands of faith in a medieval frenzy, a strike against the old gods. The body eroded not by wind alone, but by water, water that should not have been there if the official story holds true. An old kingdom pharaoh? Or something far more ancient, etched in bedrock before the Nile had its kings? Temples rise around it, but they tell only fragments. A granite stele whispers of dreams and power, Thutmose for sleeping in the shadow of the beast, promising kingship if he clears away the sands. Beneath its paws, seismic echoes hint at voids, chambers, perhaps entire rooms sealed tight for millennia. Priests, conquerors, mystics, and generals, all stood before it, none left with the full truth. The Sphinx does not yield. It watches, it waits, it bleeds riddles into the rock while the centuries drown in dust. And still, it refuses to speak. The Giza Plateau rises from the desert not as a silent expanse, but as the stage upon which human ambition carved permanence into stone. At its heart stands a monument unlike any other, the Great Sphinx. Hewn directly from the limestone bedrock, its colossal form lies crouched beside the pyramid complex of Pharaoh Khafre, its body stretching 73 meters in length and its head towering 20 meters above the ground. To stand before it is to confront not only a monument of engineering but a fragment of the oldest questions humanity has ever posed about kingship, divinity, and time itself. The sheer size alone defies comprehension. No blocks lifted, no stones transported, but the very earth itself cut and shaped into a form that would endure across 5 millennia. The setting is precise, calculated, deliberate. The Sphinx aligns with the pyramids of Khufu and Khafre, its face turned directly east, staring into the horizon where the sun rises each day. This orientation was not a matter of chance. In the religious framework of the Old Kingdom, the rising sun embodied the cycle of rebirth and divine authority. The monument's position on the plateau is no accident. It is a sentinel tied to cosmic order, its gaze locked on the eternal renewal of light. Archaeologists date the construction to around 2500 BCE, during the reign of Khafre, the builder of the second pyramid at Giza. The Sphinx sits adjacent to the causeway that once linked Khafre's mortuary temple to the Valley Temple, an architectural placement that suggests its role was far more than decorative. It was the guardian of the passage, the stone embodiment of divine kingship standing between the realm of the living and the resting place of the dead. Khafre's name survives in temple inscriptions, his pyramid still dominates the plateau, and it is within this framework that most scholars situate the Sphinx as his creation. A colossal self-image fusing human intelligence with the brute force of the lion. Yet, certainty is never simple. The monument itself bears no direct inscription naming Khafre. There is no carved dedication, no chiseled cartouche declaring ownership. The attribution rests on circumstantial but compelling evidence. The alignment with Khafre's pyramid, the similarity of facial features to surviving statues of the king, and the archaeological context of the surrounding temples built of massive limestone blocks quarried from the very trench that gave shape to the Sphinx. To the trained eye, the architectural unity of pyramid, causeway, temples, and Sphinx reveals a coherent vision, a deliberate plan executed under a single reign. The earliest written testimonies to the Sphinx's existence come not from the builders but from later ages, when its purpose was already half forgotten and its body half buried in sand. By the New Kingdom, more than 1,000 years after Khafre, pharaohs like Thutmose IV sought to restore the monument, clearing away the encroaching desert and inscribing their own stories upon its stone. The dream stele, erected between its paws in the 15th century BCE, tells of a prince who slept in its shadow, who dreamt the Sphinx promised him kingship if he would free it from the suffocating sands. Whether literal or propagandistic, the inscription reveals a truth. Even in antiquity, the Sphinx was already ancient, mysterious, and revered as a voice of divine authority. Classical writers added further layers to its myth. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, passed through Egypt recording tales of pyramids and kings, but curiously said little of the Sphinx, suggesting that even by then its original meaning was obscured. Pliny the Elder, in the 1st century CE, described it in his Natural History, noting its immense size and reporting that Egyptians regarded it as a symbol of the sun god. To the Greeks and Romans, the Sphinx fused into their own traditions, resonating with the mythical Riddler of Thebes, though the Egyptian original was no riddle poser but a guardian, a silent force watching the passage of centuries. The scale of the monument is inseparable from its construction technique. Unlike the pyramids composed of millions of blocks, the Sphinx is carved from a single mass of limestone bedrock, the quarried stone from around its body repurposed into temples standing beside it. This dual process, the carving out of negative space and the building up of monumental blocks, binds the Sphinx to its surrounding architecture. Every cut in the stone was deliberate, each stage revealing not only engineering skill but an ideology that demanded permanence. To carve directly into the plateau was to anchor kingship itself into the bones of the earth. The limestone layers of the Giza plateau dictated the form. Softer layers formed the body, harder layers shaped the head, which has endured more intact despite the ravages of weather and human damage. The scale of labor required speaks of an organized workforce, likely the same skilled artisans and conscripted laborers who built Khufu's pyramid. Their work was not random but orchestrated under the strict oversight of royal architects and priests, who measured not just with ropes and plumb lines but with cosmological intent. The Sphinx occupies a liminal position between the monumental pyramids and the valley temples that once greeted the Nile. Travelers approaching the plateau by river would have seen the creature rising from the desert edge, a hybrid colossus embodying power and awe. Its body, part lion, symbolized unmatched strength. Its head, adorned with the Neme's headdress of pharaohs, declared royal identity. This fusion was not a mere artistic flourish but a theological statement. The king is both man and more than man, guardian and god, an earthly ruler fused with eternal authority. By the time Arab chroniclers wrote of it in the Middle Ages, the Sphinx had already endured millennia of shifting sands and changing faiths. To those earlier civilizations, the Old Kingdom Egyptians who conceived it, the New Kingdom pharaohs who restored it, the Greeks who reimagined it, and the Romans who marveled at it, the Sphinx was never a ruin. It was a presence. Even when half-buried, its head staring from the desert floor, it commanded reverence, speculation, and fear. Every feature of the monument's placement ties it to the pyramid field yet sets it apart. The pyramids are tombs, monumental stairways to the heavens, built for the afterlife of kings. The Sphinx, however, was never a tomb. It housed no body, bore no sealed chambers, carried no treasure. Instead, it functioned as eternal guardian, a visible threshold marking the sacred geography of Giza. Its silence is not emptiness but authority. It does not contain, it defines. The Great Sphinx remains the largest monolithic statue of the ancient world. 5,000 years have passed since it first took shape under the chisels of Khufu's craftsmen, and still it anchors the plateau. While dynasties rose and fell, while conquerors came and went, while faiths shifted and languages changed, the Sphinx continued to stare east, waiting for the sun. Even in ruin, even scarred, its presence commands attention. Its very survival a testimony to the permanence envisioned by those who cut it from the rock. The Sphinx is not simply stone. It is context carved into permanence. It stands beside Khufu's pyramid, within sight of Khufu's, aligned with the temples of the dead and the path of the sun. It is rooted in the Old Kingdom's age of pyramid builders, yet seen through the eyes of New Kingdom priests, Greek historians, Roman travelers, and medieval chroniclers. Every culture layered meaning upon it, yet none could erase the original. A colossal guardian carved into the earth at the height of the 4th dynasty, an expression of a king's power and the permanence of Egypt itself. The Sphinx is more than a monument. It is a statement cut into stone, a declaration that kingship was not merely political but cosmic, binding the ruler to forces greater than himself. Its form is no accident, no idle artistic experiment. The lion's body speaks of raw power, a predator whose strength and authority were unmatched in the natural world, while the human head, carved with the Neme's headdress, carries the unmistakable imprint of pharaonic identity. In this fusion lies a theology. The king is both man and more than man, not only a ruler of people but the guardian of divine order. Egypt called this order Ma'at, the balance that held the cosmos in place, and the Sphinx was carved as its sentinel. The significance of the hybrid is evident across Egyptian art, yet nowhere is it more colossal than here on the Giza Plateau. Lions had long been associated with protective power in Egyptian culture, appearing at temple entrances and in statuary as fierce guardians. The decision to carve the lion not in miniature but at such monumental scale declared to all who approached that the pharaoh was the earthly force of protection itself. The human face imposed upon the lion's body did not weaken the animal. It elevated it, making it not a beast but an embodiment of royal divinity. The Sphinx became the stone proclamation that kingship was eternal and that the king's authority was both earthly and cosmic. The orientation of the Sphinx confirms this. Facing due east, the monument fixes its gaze on the horizon where the sun rises at the equinox. In the religious framework of the Old Kingdom, the sun god Ra was the supreme deity, his daily journey across the sky representing creation, life, death, and rebirth. To tie the Sphinx's unblinking eyes to the rising sun was to anchor the pharaoh's image to the cycle of eternity itself. Each dawn, as the sun lifted above the desert horizon, its rays fell upon the stone face, uniting the king with the divine power of the solar god. The Sphinx thus became not only a guardian of the plateau but a participant in the cosmic rhythm, a monumental witness to the eternal return of light. This solar connection was not speculative, it was deliberate, rooted in the broader architecture of Giza. Khufu's pyramid complex, with its temples, causeway, and alignment, was already oriented to celestial order. The Sphinx amplified this alignment, serving as the threshold where earthly kingship met the divine sun. It was more than stone cut from bedrock. It was a machine of theology, designed to fix in stone the eternal bond between Pharaoh and Ra. Within Egyptian religion, guardianship was essential. Temples and tombs were not simply buildings but sacred spaces where the boundary between the human and divine worlds could be crossed. Such thresholds demanded protection. The Sphinx, crouched low yet immense, became that protector on a monumental scale. Its posture, forelegs extended, body tensed, is one of readiness. A lion poised not for idle rest but for perpetual watch. This position was common in smaller Sphinx statues placed at temple entrances, yet here it was expanded beyond measure. The Great Sphinx guarded not only a door but an entire sacred landscape, the necropolis of kings whose pyramids rose behind it. It declared that these were not ordinary tombs but sanctified places where the dead king lived on as a god, shielded by the eternal guardian carved into the plateau itself. By the time of the New Kingdom, more than 1,000 years after Khufu, the Sphinx had already aged into enigma. The desert sands repeatedly buried its body, leaving only the head visible above the shifting ground. Yet even half-buried, it retained its authority. Pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, whose empire stretched across lands Khufu could never have imagined, looked upon the Sphinx and saw a monument not of the past but of divine presence. It was during the reign of Thutmose IV, around 1400 BCE, that the monument was given a new layer of meaning, recorded on the granite stele set between its paws. The inscription tells of a prince, not yet king, who hunted in the desert and rested in the shadow of the colossal head. As he slept, he dreamt that the Sphinx spoke to him. It promised him kingship if he would clear the sands that engulfed its body. The prince awoke, obeyed, and later became Pharaoh Thutmose IV, erecting the stele as testimony to this divine encounter. The dream stele was not a neutral record. It was political propaganda, a means of legitimizing a king whose claim to the throne may have been contested. By inscribing that his rule was ordained by the Sphinx itself, Thutmose IV presented his authority not as the result of inheritance or conquest but as divine will spoken from the oldest monument of the Giza Plateau. The text on the stele does more than narrate a dream. It reframes the Sphinx itself. To the New Kingdom Egyptians, the monument was no longer simply Khufu's guardian but a divine being in its own right, often associated with the solar deity Hormukit, Horus of the horizon. This identification fused the monument even more tightly with solar worship. The Sphinx was not just an image of kingship. It was a god, a manifestation of the horizon where the sun rose and set. The monument became both protector and oracle, capable of granting legitimacy and power to those who honored it. This reinterpretation did not erase its original function but layered new meaning upon it. The Sphinx became a palimpsest of Egyptian religion, its stone body carrying the weight of shifting beliefs across centuries. To the Old Kingdom, it was Khafure's eternal guardian tied to Ra. To the New Kingdom, it was a god in its own right, speaking in dreams and bestowing kingship. To later rulers, it remained a symbol of antiquity, a link to an age of builders whose works seemed impossible to replicate. Each layer of interpretation added to its enigma, each generation seeing in the Sphinx what it needed most: authority, divinity, permanence. The hybrid body, the solar alignment, the guardian role, and the prophetic voice of the dream steel together reveal why the Sphinx has always stood apart from the pyramids it guards. The pyramids are tombs, their meaning fixed in the afterlife of a single king. The Sphinx transcends any one ruler. It is a theological statement carved in limestone, a declaration of kingship bound to cosmic order, an image both human and divine, a protector of sacred space, and a voice that could speak across centuries. The monument's silence in stone was never mute. It spoke in alignment with the sun, in posture of guardianship, in the words inscribed upon the steel of Thutmose IV, and in the enduring reverence of all who came after. The Sphinx's body is immense, its paws stretched forward in eternal vigilance. But it is the head, the human face crowned with the royal Nemes headdress, that has drawn endless scrutiny. A lion's body can be explained as a guardian, a universal symbol of power. But a face carved into limestone 5 millennia ago is more than stone. It is identity. The central question that has consumed archaeologists and historians alike is, whose face is it? For more than a century, the dominant view has linked the Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafre, ruler of Egypt's 4th dynasty between roughly 2558 and 2532 BCE. This attribution rests on powerful circumstantial evidence. The Sphinx lies within Khafre's pyramid complex, directly adjacent to his causeway and his valley temple. The blocks cut from the trench surrounding the monument were used to build the temples associated with his pyramid. In the discipline of archaeology, context matters, and context ties the Sphinx to Khafre. But context alone is not a face. Scholars turn to art, comparing the weathered contours of the Sphinx's visage with statues of Khafre that survive in extraordinary condition, particularly the famous diorite statue now in the Cairo Museum. Both bear the Nemes headdress. Both display the same proportion of cheekbones, jawline, and a subtle, almost enigmatic expression. To many, the resemblance is more than coincidence. It is the sculpted image of a single king, carved on a scale no other ruler ever attempted. Yet evidence never sits quietly. The identification is strong, but it is not conclusive. Unlike statues or stelae, the Sphinx carries no inscription naming Khafre. No hieroglyphs on its body or temples declare his ownership. The attribution, though widely accepted, remains an interpretation, built from comparison and context rather than explicit proof. And this gap, this absence of a name carved in stone, has left space for debate, a debate that continues to ripple through Egyptology. Some scholars have suggested the face might not belong to Khafre at all. Alternative candidates have been raised, each with their own claim. One is Khufu, Khafre's father, the builder of the Great Pyramid. Khufu's reign, from 2589 to 2566 BCE, marked the apex of Old Kingdom power. Some argue the Sphinx could have been his creation, an extension of his monumental vision. Others propose Jedefra, Khafre's elder brother, who ruled briefly between 2566 and 2558 BCE. Jedefra, though less prominent than Khufu or Khafre, is known to have promoted the solar cult and may have sought to mark his reign with a hybrid monument tied directly to the rising sun. In the absence of definitive inscriptions, these theories remain possible, though each strains against the stronger archaeological ties between the Sphinx and Khafre's architectural complex. The art historical analysis is itself a battlefield. Proponents of Khafre argue that the proportions of the Sphinx's face, high cheekbones, broad jaw, forward-projecting mouth, match his statues more closely than any other known pharaoh. But detractors point to the damage of erosion, the scale of the carving, and the possibility that the face has been altered over time. Measurements of facial proportions taken from surviving statues of Khafre do not align perfectly with the surviving contours of the Sphinx. The discrepancies raise the question of whether the monument's face was recarved, perhaps even significantly altered, after its initial creation. The headdress offers further clues. The nemes, a striped cloth worn exclusively by pharaohs, frames the face, falling across the shoulders of the monument. Its presence is indisputable. This is not the face of an anonymous figure, but of a king. The uraeus, the cobra emblem that once projected from the forehead of the Sphinx, is now gone, destroyed in antiquity. Its absence adds to the difficulty of precise identification. Yet the nemes itself cements the Sphinx's role as a royal image. No non-royal figure would ever be represented in such a form. Archaeological evidence embedded in the very bedrock offers another line of analysis. The Sphinx and its surrounding temples were cut from the same limestone layers. Blocks extracted during the carving were used to build the Sphinx Temple and Khafre's Valley Temple, structures whose design and construction style match Khafre's reign. This linkage between quarry marks, temple architecture, and the monument's construction reinforces the Khafre attribution. The evidence forms a chain. Quarrying, building, alignment, and stylistic features converge on his reign. And yet, despite this compelling case, doubt persists. One of the most provocative alternative theories suggests the Sphinx may not have been carved as a human at all. Some geologists and Egyptologists have argued that the disproportion between the body and head, the head being unusually small relative to the immense lion body, indicates recarving. The hypothesis suggests that the Sphinx may originally have been shaped as a lion entirely, a symbolic guardian animal, and only later recarved into a human face by Khafre or another ruler. The smaller head, compared to the massive scale of the body, strengthens this line of argument. A later resculpting, necessary to impose a human visage on an already existing monument, could explain the awkward scale and the potential misalignment of features with known statues. This idea has drawn both fierce criticism and strong interest. Critics point out that many Egyptian monuments display exaggerated proportions for symbolic reasons, and that the scale discrepancy may not necessarily prove alteration. Yet the theory has persisted, particularly among those who seek to push the date of the Sphinx further back in time, suggesting an earlier phase of construction before Khafre. While mainstream Egyptology holds firm to the 4th dynasty context, the notion of recarving continues to fuel debate, precisely because it aligns with the archaeological reality that the Sphinx bears no name, no original inscription, and no unbroken chain of historical testimony. The erosion of the head complicates matters further. The features of the face have been worn down by thousands of years of wind and sand. The nose, destroyed in the 14th century CE, and the missing beard, fragments of which are now in the British Museum and Cairo Museum, have stripped the Sphinx of details that might once have clarified its identity. What remains is a softened visage, recognizable as royal but stripped of precision. The absence of fine detail opens space for interpretation, each scholar projecting their analysis upon the weathered stone. Stylistic comparisons to statues and reliefs offer clues but not final answers. The Cairo diorite statue of Khafre shows a powerful jawline and forward mouth, features present in the Sphinx but altered by erosion. Statues of Khufu, though fewer and less monumental, display different facial proportions, leading most analysts to lean toward Khafre. Djedefre's known statues are rare, making comparison difficult. In this ambiguity lies the enduring mystery. The Sphinx is both specific and general, a face of a king but not conclusively the face of one alone. What is certain is that the Sphinx's head, whether original or recarved, carried intentional symbolism. Its scale, its headdress, its alignment, and its integration into the temple complex mark it as a royal image tied to the theology of kingship. Whether Khafre's sculptors cut the face directly into stone, or whether later hands reshaped an older lion, the result is the same. A human visage imposed upon the eternal body of a guardian beast, fusing political authority with divine order. The debate over identity does not weaken the monument's power. It amplifies it, leaving a question suspended in stone, unanswered across 4,500 years. The Sphinx's face is not simply a likeness. It is a battlefield of interpretation, where context, art, erosion, and recarving collide. Each scholar who gazes upon it sees both evidence and absence. The face remains, scarred but unyielding, a king's image without a name, a human imprint carved into a lion's body, the fusion of man, monarch, and eternity itself. The Great Sphinx, colossal and immovable, is not untouched. Its survival across nearly 5,000 years is not a story of permanence alone but of attrition, of wounds inflicted by nature and by human hands. To look at the monument today is to see not only a guardian of kings but also a survivor scarred by centuries of weathering, desecration, and neglect. Its most infamous wound, the absent nose, dominates discussion, but the story of its damage is far larger, written into every eroded contour of its limestone body. The Sphinx was cut directly from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau, a geology of layered limestone varying in hardness. The head, carved from a denser stratum, has withstood erosion far better than the softer body. Wind carried sand against its flanks year after year, scouring the stone, while the porous layers at the base absorbed moisture from the Nile's annual flooding before modern control of the river. This cycle of saturation and drying fractured the stone, leaving fissures that widened into deep scars. By the time archaeologists began systematic work in the 19th century, large sections of the body were already pitted, worn, and broken. The paws and chest have required repeated restorations across modern centuries, but the erosion visible today is a record of millennia of environmental assault. Yet natural weathering does not account for the absence of its most striking feature, the missing nose. For generations, the absence was blamed on Napoleon Bonaparte's troops, who occupied Egypt between 1798 and 1801. Stories circulated that French soldiers used the Sphinx for target practice, blasting away its nose with cannon fire. The tale became entrenched in popular imagination, repeated in books, engravings, and lectures well into the 19th and 20th centuries. But the evidence tells otherwise. Sketches of the Sphinx made before Napoleon's arrival, including one by Danish traveler Frederick Louis Norden in 1737, already show the nose gone. The myth of Napoleonic destruction collapses under the weight of documentation, a convenient scapegoat disproven by earlier depictions. The true story lies centuries earlier. In the 14th century, a Sufi zealot named Muhammad Sa'im al-Dar struck the monument. According to accounts recorded by the Egyptian historian al-Makrizi, writing in the early 1400s, Sa'im al-Dar viewed the Sphinx as an object of idolatry, a remnant of pagan antiquity. Outraged by villagers who made offerings at its feet in hopes of increasing their harvests, he defaced the statue in a symbolic act of religious purification. He struck at the face, removing the nose. This was not the act of an invading army but of a lone man with a hammer, targeting the most visible feature to strip the statue of its power. For this act he was later executed for vandalism, but the damage was done. The missing nose, often treated as a mystery, is instead a testimony to religious conflict and the collision of faith with the endurance of Egypt's monuments. Other wounds tell their own histories. The beard, or ceremonial false beard of the pharaoh, once extended from the Sphinx's chin. Fragments of this beard were unearthed in the 19th century and are now divided between the British Museum in London and the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The surviving pieces, carved from stone, reveal that the beard was not part of the original monument but an addition from the New Kingdom, perhaps during the restoration efforts of the 18th dynasty. Its fall left the chin eroded and uneven, another fragment of the Sphinx's long biography of alteration. The body bears marks of both time and deliberate human intervention. Sand buried the Sphinx up to its neck for much of its recorded history, protecting the lower sections from erosion while paradoxically endangering it by trapping moisture. When Thutmose IV ordered the sands cleared around 1400 BCE, he simultaneously preserved the monument and altered its history by associating his reign with its restoration. Later rulers repeated the act of clearing and repairing, each one adding new masonry to support crumbling sections of the body. The current Sphinx is not a pristine Old Kingdom creation, but a composite of original limestone and later restorations, a patchwork shaped by necessity. Close inspection has revealed further traces of its original appearance. On the face, beneath layers of erosion, microscopic analysis has detected remnants of pigment. The Sphinx was not always bare stone. It was once vividly painted. Traces of red pigment have been found on the face, suggesting the skin of the pharaoh was rendered in the reddish tones used to depict men in Egyptian art. Other fragments indicate the Neme's headdress was striped with bold colors, likely blue and yellow, echoing the painted reliefs and statues that survive from the Old Kingdom. To ancient eyes, the Sphinx was not the monochrome colossus seen today, but a radiant figure blazing with color under the sun. The weathering of centuries has stripped it of paint, leaving only ghostly hints of its former brilliance, but those faint traces change how the monument must be understood. It was once alive with symbolic hues, not a faded ruin but a living image of royal power. Restoration has been a constant companion to the Sphinx across the centuries. Evidence of Old Kingdom repair suggests even the original builders fought against the instability of the limestone layers. In the New Kingdom, rulers such as Amenhotep II and Ramses II contributed to its upkeep, clearing sand and shoring up weakened stone. Modern interventions began in earnest under the Egyptian Antiquities Service in the 20th century, with restorations continuing through the present. Blocks of new limestone have been added to the chest, paws, and flanks, each layer recording an era's attempt to keep the monument standing. Far from being untouched antiquity, the Sphinx is a palimpsest of conservation, scarred and sustained by generations unwilling to let it fall. Its wounds, then, tell the story of human history as much as geological time. The erosion speaks of thousands of years of sand and wind on the plateau. The missing nose bears the mark of religious conflict in the 14th century, when Saim Aldar's hammer shattered its face. The absent beard tells of later additions and their collapse. The traces of paint speak of a past in which the Sphinx glowed with life and authority. Every scar adds to the monument's complexity, layering time upon stone, each wound an archive of what Egypt has endured and what the Sphinx itself has withstood. To stand before it is to face not only the image of a pharaoh but the history of destruction and preservation bound together in limestone. The Sphinx is not whole, and perhaps it never was. It survives not because it escaped damage, but because it endured it, absorbing the blows of time, religion, and nature into its very being. Its face, scarred and incomplete, continues to watch the rising sun as it has for 4,500 years, a monument that carries its wounds openly, each fracture a line in the longest record of survival carved into stone. The limestone body of the Great Sphinx bears scars that are older than any written record. Its surface is cut by channels, undulating grooves, and weathered depressions that seem to tell a story not just of time, but of forces more powerful than desert winds. For centuries, scholars assumed that the monument's damage was the predictable result of sand abrasion, the unrelenting grind of the Sahara. But in the late 20th century, a new argument surged to the forefront of Egyptology, not from archaeologists but from geologists, and it shook the study of the Sphinx like few debates before. The question was simple: what kind of erosion carved those patterns into the stone, and what did that mean for the age of the monument? The geology of the Giza Plateau is a record in itself. The Sphinx was cut from layered limestone, laid down millions of years ago when this region was seabed. Some layers are compact and hard, resistant to erosion, while others are softer and more porous, vulnerable to weathering. This explains why the head of the Sphinx, carved from harder limestone, has survived with sharper definition than the body, carved from weaker stone. But when examined closely, the weathering of the body does not appear uniform with what wind and sand alone would cause. Instead of sharp-edged abrasion, the walls of the enclosure and the body itself display rounded channels, vertical fissures, and undulating wave-like forms more consistent with water running over stone. It was this observation that, in the early 1990s, led geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University to argue that the Sphinx showed unmistakable evidence of water erosion. To Schoch, the patterns matched rainfall weathering, not wind abrasion. If that was true, the implications were enormous. The last time heavy, sustained rainfall occurred on the Giza Plateau was long before the Old Kingdom, between roughly 7,000 and 5,000 BCE, when the climate of North Africa was wetter, before the Sahara expanded into desert. If the Sphinx's body bore the marks of such rain, then its carving could predate dynastic Egypt by thousands of years, placing its origins in a pre-dynastic or even lost civilization. It was a claim that upended the established timeline of Egyptian history. Mainstream Egyptologists countered sharply. The accepted attribution of the Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafre, builder of the second pyramid at Giza, around 2500 BCE, is grounded not only in stylistic comparisons but also in archaeological context. The Sphinx sits in a quarry directly linked to Khafre's pyramid complex, and the nearby valley and Sphinx temples incorporate massive limestone blocks cut from the Sphinx enclosure itself. Quarry marks and construction patterns fit seamlessly with the reign of Khafre in the 4th dynasty. To propose a Sphinx carved thousands of years earlier would mean accepting a staggering historical gap. A colossus existing in isolation for millennia before Khafre's pyramid builders conveniently repurposed its quarry. For most Egyptologists, the contextual evidence outweighs the geological claims. Still, the erosion debate cannot be dismissed as fringe speculation. The rounded weathering features are visibly distinct from mere sand abrasion. Some scholars argue that while water played a role, it may have come not from ancient rainfall but from rising groundwater and capillary action, especially in periods when the Nile's floodplain extended closer to the plateau. Others suggest that intermittent rainfall during the Old Kingdom itself, though lighter than in prehistoric times, could have produced localized weathering over centuries. The debate hinges not only on geology but also on the interpretation of climate history in the Nile Valley. The controversy has fueled more radical theories as well. Some proponents of alternative history argue that the Sphinx may date to a forgotten civilization far earlier than Pharaonic Egypt, proposing dates as early as 10,000 BCE. They link this to broader hypotheses about lost advanced cultures at the end of the last ice age. These claims, while popularized in media and books, find little support in academic Egyptology. No material evidence, artifacts, tools, inscriptions, has ever been found at Giza to suggest such an early culture capable of carving the Sphinx. The archaeological record of Egypt begins with Neolithic settlements along the Nile, gradually evolving into the pre-dynastic chiefdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt around 4000 to 3100 BCE. By the time of Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid around 2580 BCE, Egypt had already developed centralized administration, writing, and monumental construction. No evidence of an earlier lost civilization intrudes into this continuum. Yet even as mainstream scholarship dismisses the extreme claims, the erosion question remains a point of fascination because it touches on something undeniable. The Sphinx has weathered differently than the pyramids beside it. The pyramids, built of quarried blocks stacked and cased in harder stone, retain sharp angles even after thousands of years. The Sphinx, cut from living rock, looks melted, softened, worn away. Restoration blocks patched onto its flanks in Pharaonic and modern times highlight just how badly the softer limestone has suffered. The contrast between pyramid and Sphinx is not only architectural but geological, and it demands explanation. The debate forces consideration of how the Egyptians themselves treated the monument. Records show that by the New Kingdom, more than 1,000 years after Khafre, the Sphinx was already buried to its shoulders in sand, requiring rulers such as Thutmose IV to clear it. His dream stele, placed between the paws around 1400 BCE, recounts how the young prince dreamed of the Sphinx promising him kingship if he removed the sands that engulfed it. This suggests the monument had been repeatedly overwhelmed by desert even in antiquity. Such cycles of burial and exposure would have altered the erosion process, shielding parts of the monument while leaving others vulnerable. The geological debate must account for not only ancient climate but also how centuries of sand burial shaped the damage visible today. The Sphinx, therefore, becomes not only an archaeological puzzle but also a geological one. Its surface records the interplay of environment, climate, and human intervention across 5 millennia. The vertical fissures in its enclosure, the rounded forms of its flanks, the crumbling layers at its base. All these features fuel arguments that extend far beyond Egyptology, touching on the broader question of how civilizations read the landscape of time. Egyptologists hold firm to the context of the 4th dynasty, anchored by Khafre's pyramid complex and the patterns of Old Kingdom construction. Geologists and alternative theorists insist that the stone itself tells a different story, one of reigns that fell before dynasties existed. To stand before the Sphinx is to face not only the monument's immense scale but also the weight of these debates, etched into every groove of its body. The erosion patterns are not passive marks of time. They are active battlegrounds of interpretation, where geology and archaeology wrestle over history. Each fissure challenges the boundaries of scholarship. Each curve of stone becomes a contested sentence in the biography of the monument. The Sphinx endures, as much a riddle to science as it was to myth, its weathered body carrying questions as monumental as its form. The paws of the Great Sphinx stretch forward like the silent threshold to another world. Between them lies the dream stele of Thutmose IV, set in place around 1400 BCE, but behind and beneath that space, for centuries, rumors have persisted of chambers, tunnels, and hidden archives sealed within the bedrock. The idea that the Sphinx guards more than stone has haunted ancient texts, medieval chronicles, and modern science alike, each generation searching not just for a monument, but for what it might be hiding. The earliest written references already cast the Sphinx as a figure of mystery. In the 1st century CE, the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, wrote of the Sphinx with awe, describing it as a marvel of Egypt and noting that its purpose remained obscure even then. The Greeks before him had associated sphinxes with riddles, guardianship, and hidden knowledge, an image that attached itself seamlessly to the colossal Egyptian form staring eastward across the Giza plateau. Later, Arab chroniclers of the medieval period added new layers of speculation. In the 9th and 10th centuries, writers such as Al-Makrizi repeated stories of underground passages, crypts filled with treasures of the ancients, and inscriptions pointing to knowledge preserved from a forgotten world before the flood. For these chroniclers, the Sphinx was less a monument to a king and more a sentinel of forbidden archives. By the time European travelers began arriving in greater numbers during the 17th and 18th centuries, the notion of chambers hidden beneath the Sphinx had hardened into legend. Accounts circulated of secret entrances near the paws, doorways long sealed, tunnels descending into darkness. The growth of Egyptology in the 19th century introduced a more systematic approach, but even serious scholars could not fully separate their work from the weight of myth. Napoleon's savants, who documented the monument in the 1790s, noted fissures and hollows in the bedrock enclosure, and speculation persisted that these might connect to interior voids. The 20th century brought modern tools to bear on the question. In the late 1920s, Émile Barrès, a French engineer tasked with restoring the Sphinx, reported clearing tunnels and shafts near the monument, some of which extended beneath the body. These passages, however, appeared to be later cuttings, repairs, or natural fissures, not intentional hidden chambers of the Old Kingdom. Still, the reports of Barrès, who worked from 1925 to 1936, helped fuel public fascination with the idea that the Sphinx was not solid, but honeycombed with secrets. The myth took on an entirely new dimension in the 20th century through the figure of Edgar Cayce, the American psychic whose trance readings in the 1930s spoke of a hall of records buried beneath the Sphinx. Cayce claimed this hall contained the wisdom of Atlantis, a lost civilization that predated Egypt. According to him, it would be found beneath the right paw. Though dismissed by scholars, Cayce's claims inspired decades of speculation, books, and expeditions. Even today, many alternative theories about the Sphinx and hidden knowledge trace back to his predictions. Science, however, did not stand idle. In 1977, a team from Stanford Research Institute, SRI, working with Egyptian authorities, conducted ground-penetrating radar and resistivity surveys around the Sphinx. Their results indicated anomalies beneath the surface, zones of differing density suggesting cavities or voids. These findings were not definitive proof of chambers, but they added scientific weight to the notion that something lay beneath the paws. The interest intensified in the 1990s. In 1991, geophysicists Thomas DeBecke and John Anthony West carried out seismic surveys around the Sphinx enclosure. Their data suggested significant subsurface anomalies, large, rectangular features beneath the front paws and along the sides of the monument. These appeared to be hollow zones, distinct from the natural limestone stratigraphy. To some, this was confirmation of long-suspected chambers. To others, it was an ambiguous signal, one that could be explained by natural fissures, ancient quarrying or restoration works rather than hidden halls. Egyptian authorities, led by figures such as Zahi Hawass, acknowledged the anomalies but cautioned against sensational claims. Excavations around the paws and body revealed no entrances leading to secret archives. The chambers hinted at by radar and seismic data remained unproven, and subsequent surveys suggested that many anomalies were the result of natural faults in the limestone bedrock. What was certain was that no library, no hall of records, no cache of Atlantean wisdom had been unearthed. Still, the persistence of the myth is not without reason. The Sphinx enclosure itself is a landscape of cuts, tunnels, and layers created over thousands of years. Ancient repair works, from the New Kingdom to the Roman era, left behind masonry infills and hidden cavities. Modern restoration, beginning in the 20th century and continuing into the 21st, has added concrete and blocks around the body. Differentiating between natural fissures, ancient cuttings, and potential intentional chambers is complex even with advanced technology. Every anomaly becomes a point of contest, every hollow a potential doorway in the eyes of those seeking more than stone. Archaeology today approaches the question with caution but also with increasingly refined tools. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and 3D imaging provide non-invasive ways to map what lies beneath without excavation. The consensus remains that while voids and fissures exist beneath the Sphinx, none has been demonstrated to be a chamber built to house records or treasure. The stone tells a story of geology, weathering, and human repair rather than hidden vaults. But the search itself reveals as much about human need as about the monument. Our need to believe that beneath the surface lies something more profound than what meets the eye. Legends of tunnels and hidden halls continue to echo across centuries, from Pliny's Marvel to Al-Makrisi's Chronicles, from Casey's visions to the radar surveys of Stanford and the seismic studies of the 1990s. Each era projects its own hopes and fears onto the bedrock beneath the paws. Some see proof of lost civilizations, others see only natural stone. The Sphinx, massive and silent, offers no answer. Its paws rest firmly on the limestone of Giza, above anomalies that stir debate but refuse to yield certainty. The monument absorbs the weight of human speculation, bearing the myths of treasure, libraries, and secrets as it has borne sandstorms and centuries. The story is not only about whether chambers exist, but about how the Sphinx has become a canvas for every age's imagination. Technology refines the questions, but the riddle remains the same. Beneath the paws lie voids in the stone, but it is in the human mind that the larger void resides, filled with longing for hidden histories and truths sealed away by time. For more than 4,000 years, the Sphinx has remained fixed in the sands of Giza, its gaze turned eternally east, yet its meaning shifting with every civilization that confronted it. To the pharaohs who built the pyramids, it was both guardian and symbol, tied to the power of the sun god Ra and the authority of the king. The evidence of its Old Kingdom context is unmistakable. The Sphinx sits in front of the Valley Temple of Khafre, aligned with the causeways and monuments of the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BCE. Carved directly from the limestone bedrock of the plateau, its immense form was more than decoration. It was an embodiment of divine kingship in stone. In its face, many scholars have seen the likeness of Khafre himself, a ruler whose pyramid rises just behind it, cementing the connection between human sovereignty and cosmic order. To the ancient Egyptians, the Sphinx was not an enigma but a presence, an active protector of sacred ground, watching over the necropolis of Giza. When later dynasties inherited its shadow, they continued to attach their power to it. The dream stele of Thutmose IV, set between its paws in the 15th century BCE, recorded how the young prince, before becoming king, fell asleep in the shade of the monument. In his dream, the Sphinx promised him kingship if he cleared the sands that had already begun to bury it. For the Egyptians of the New Kingdom, the Sphinx had become a living oracle, a force that could grant divine legitimacy. By restoring it, Thutmose was not only protecting an ancient monument but inscribing his own rule into its sacred aura. Across the centuries, successive pharaohs repaired the monument's body and enclosure, offering small chapels and steel inscriptions, reaffirming that the Sphinx was a timeless guardian of kingship. Yet outside Egypt, the Sphinx became something else entirely. When the Greeks encountered the colossal form, they projected their own mythology upon it. To them, the Sphinx was a creature of riddles, a deadly guardian of forbidden knowledge. Though their own Sphinx was winged and female, perched in myth on the roads to Thebes, the Greek imagination fused with the Egyptian colossus to reinforce the idea of the Sphinx as a keeper of mysteries. This interpretation, filtered through Hellenistic thought, reshaped the way the ancient Mediterranean world perceived the monument. By the Roman era, writers such as Pliny the Elder described the Sphinx as one of Egypt's marvels, a relic of great antiquity whose origins were already obscure. The Roman imagination, steeped in Egypt's aura of ancient wisdom, turned the Sphinx into a symbol of enigmatic antiquity, a monument whose very silence invited speculation. As centuries passed and Egypt became Islamic, the Sphinx's presence did not fade. Arab historians of the Middle Ages saw in it both wonder and danger. The 14th century chronicler Al-Makrizi recorded accounts that described the Sphinx as a talisman guarding hidden treasures, a monument linked to ancient sorcery and forgotten knowledge. For some, it was a relic of a pre-Islamic, even pre-flood world, built by giants or magicians to conceal wisdom from later generations. Its nose, famously destroyed around 1378 CE, fell to the blows of Muhammad Sa'im al-Dar, a Sufi zealot who, angered by local peasants offering prayers to the Sphinx for fertility, defaced it in an act of iconoclasm. In that act of violence, the Sphinx was transformed once again, not just a monument of antiquity, but a symbol of contested belief, standing at the crossroads of faith and idolatry. In the age of European exploration and colonial expansion, the Sphinx entered another role, that of an icon for the West's imagination of Egypt. When Napoleon's expedition arrived in 1798, artists and scholars documented the monument as it stood then, buried to its shoulders in sand. Their sketches and engravings spread across Europe, casting the Sphinx as the face of an ancient civilization frozen in time. To a continent gripped by Orientalism, the Sphinx was no longer just a monument but a riddle of history itself, a silent emblem of lost grandeur. In the 19th century, as Egyptology emerged as a scientific discipline, the Sphinx became central to debates about chronology, kingship, and the origins of Egyptian civilization. Travelers arriving by steamer or caravan recorded their impressions of a head rising from the desert, half hidden, as though guarding secrets it refused to reveal. By the 20th century, the Sphinx had become an icon on a global scale. Restorations under Émile Bourais in the 1920s and 1930s freed the body from centuries of encroaching sand, and for the first time in millennia, the world could see it almost in full. The monumental lion's body, 73 meters long, joined to a human head rising over 20 meters high, emerged not only as an archaeological treasure but as a symbol recognized worldwide. Photographs of the Sphinx, now fully exposed against the backdrop of the pyramids, became staples of tourism and symbols of Egypt itself. As airplanes carried travelers across continents, as newspapers spread images at a global scale, the Sphinx was no longer just Egypt's guardian. It was humanity's monument, a face instantly recognizable on every continent. Yet its enigma persisted. The 20th century also saw the rise of fringe theories, mystics, and writers who claimed the Sphinx concealed hidden chambers or records of a forgotten civilization. Edgar Cayce's prophecies of a hall of records beneath its paws inspired countless speculations, while seismic surveys in the 1990s revived debates about what lay beneath its bedrock foundation. For mainstream archaeology, the Sphinx remained firmly within the Old Kingdom context, a monument of Khafre's reign, surrounded by the temples and causeways that fit its construction. But for the wider public, the Sphinx was more than a relic of one king. It was a puzzle that could not be closed. Its missing nose, its weathered body, its monumental silence. All these scars fueled fascination, leaving the impression that the Sphinx was not just a monument to the past, but a witness concealing unfinished stories. Today, millions stand before it each year, cameras in hand, searching for something in its eroded gaze. Tourists pose as though kissing its lips, engineers shore up its flanks with limestone blocks, and scholars continue to measure, document, and preserve. The Sphinx has become both the face of Egypt's tourism industry and the centerpiece of its enduring cultural identity. It connects Cairo to Paris, Luxor to London, the Nile Valley to Hollywood films and textbooks across the globe. Its image is printed on airline posters, postage stamps, postcards, and banknotes, the single most recognizable monument besides the pyramids themselves. And yet, beneath all this global familiarity, the aura of mystery refuses to fade. The Sphinx embodies both grandeur and enigma. It has been king and god, idol and heresy, ruin and tourist landmark. It has been worshipped, defaced, buried, rediscovered, studied, and photographed endlessly. Each era lays its own interpretation upon it, and yet none exhausts it. Whether as Khafre's likeness, Thutmose Ivy's oracle, Al-Makrizi's talisman, or Casey's gateway to Atlantis, the Sphinx accepts every role without ever speaking a word. It is the eternal watcher, fixed in stone yet fluid in meaning, as much a mirror of human imagination as a monument of carved limestone. To stand before it is to confront not just ancient Egypt but the vast weight of history itself, layered, contested, and unresolved.